I'll go on parking. I was really glad to hear both Jackie and Brian talk about that because I feel the same way that the amount of parking that goes on street and people moving their cars from one spot to another right now is pretty challenging. So I hate to limit it any more than that. Another neighborhood that I walk through often, I don't know what it's called, but it's right off May Street, and it's Young Young Lane and 30th. You know that area in there. And when I walk through there, it's a narrow street to begin with, and they all have single garages. But even with a single garage, I don't think anyone has ever parked in a garage in that neighborhood. And so they have one car in their driveway, and then they all seem to have another one or two cars on the street, which doesn't even have much street parking. I mean, that it's just, I think, a mess, really. Um, so anyway, I just think maintaining it at two spots is a good way to go.
Thanks, Sue.
Okay, I'll jump in. I think, well, a couple different things. I think first of all, Megan kind of hit the nail on the head last week when she said, you know, we don't know what the market demands because frankly, we've never let the market decide in this town. I mean, we've always forced auto ownership sort of down people's throats by the way we zone things. And I mean, I appreciate the issues with cars, and I know a lot of people like cars, but I mean, and a lot of people have cars and have multiple cars. But I do feel like if our goal here is to create a new housing product and provide more options for people, I just really hate the idea of baking in this auto dependency into the model because, you know, not everybody, just like not everybody needs a big house and a big yard, not everybody needs multiple cars and things, and maybe people don't want them at all. And I just, you know, I think with our urban growth boundaries and our limited space, and the city has talked about housing as being a #1 priority for years now, I really think we're at the point where are we going to prioritize housing for people or storage for people's cars? And I think we really need to focus on housing for people.
Thanks, Tina.
I agree.
Amy's off mute. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we do need to prioritize housing for folks. With that said, I think we also need to encourage through other avenues multimodal transportation because that allows people to get out of their cars. So whether it's walking, biking, or public transportation. And I mean, I do appreciate the concerns about parking. I know it makes things tough. I think the less curb cuts is great because it allows for a little bit more parking. I do think there's probably some other things that we can, maybe not in this discussion, but we can talk about how to make roads safer for bikes. There's lots of other different ways of doing that. But I think, yes, right now it's important to prioritize housing options and making sure that people have housing.
So I will go, and I'm so sorry I can't use my video. I feel like I'm hiding, and it's, I know this is we like to call parking the third rail of urban planning because you touch it. Any politician who touches it just gets like vilified. One of my favorite quotes about parking is nothing turns and I'm going to totally mess this up, nothing turns a capitalist libertarian into a democratic socialist faster. because they want their free parking. So my proposal, I'm going to start with my proposal and then I'll give a few reasons why. I would like to see us adopt or eliminate parking minimums at most 0.5 parking spaces per unit 4 with a very big quantifier here, or qualifier, sorry, 4 units that are within a half a mile of a grocery store. I'm sorry if you hear nailing in the background. A grocery store, and then and a transit station. Because if a person can walk to the grocery store, they are less likely to need a car. And it also incentivizes development around grocery stores and transit stations or bus stops. I feel like that would be a good approach in starting this conversation. If somebody is trying to develop this product way off of like out on like Belmont, past like, I don't know, nearing the urban growth boundary, it's going to be harder to live without a car. I mean, you have an electric bike and that's pretty much all your car-free options. So if somebody can walk to the grocery store, that's a good, it's a good way to start this conversation. So a couple of things I want to comment on what other people said. First is Brian talking about safety concerns in biking. I very much share this concern. I have been almost doored a handful of times, and it is one of the worst bike injuries and or easiest ways to die, besides being hit by a large vehicle like a truck. Dooring is horrifying, and the way that you prevent dooring from happening is by design, and specifically network design, where you encourage people to bike on streets that don't have parked cars, or the parked cars are the buffer for the bicyclist. So I'm very much, I understand his safety concern, but there's design, there's ways to design those encounters out of it. And the second comment I want to address is Sue, and saying, and this is where I get like in a downward spiral. We want more off-street parking, but we know that people aren't parking in the off-street parking. So what is the purpose of the parking requirements? So we have 2 off-street parking spaces, and people fill their garages with their stuff, and they have an RV I mean, I've heard of a guy who has 10 cars that he moves around on our city streets. And so our streets are becoming like the storage unit, a free storage unit for these people, when they should be parking in their driveways and their garages. And so I don't really understand how the system is working. And lastly, I want to see developers listen to the market, respond to the market without us getting in the way. We've had 50 years of social engineering around automobiles, and I think it's time for them to develop what they want to develop. And sorry, one last point is that if we keep putting in 2 off-street parking spots, imagine what that's going to do to our traffic and how competitive parking downtown is going to become even more. And that's all I'll say.
Okay, is that everyone? I think, I mean, from my perspective, I guess where I come down on this whole parking issue is that, you know, there's a lot of people, I kind of go down through the list, like there's people that tend to work up and down the valley, and it doesn't seem, I don't know that our transportation network are ever really going to get to the point where people can get to all the places up and down the valley. with public transportation. So it feels like there's a certain population that, you know, we're not going to get them away from owning a car. There's also another population that comes to come visit here, you know, as a resort town. They can't get here by train or airplane or bus, certainly not bringing the toys that they want to bring. And so there's people that come here who will arrive with cars, and even people that live here who chose to live here tend to want to get out to the outside world with all of their toys. And so there's that population that it doesn't seem like we're going to be able to get them away from owning a car, right? And then there's you know, the families that have kids that they're shuttling around to different things. So the net of it all is you know, I lived in New York, and I walked to the grocery store, and I lived in Portland, and I took the bus and rode my bike everywhere. And I just have a really hard time with Hood River and seeing people going completely car free. Not that some people might choose that path, and that sounds like a great path if they can choose it and their lifestyle supports it, but I get a bit worried about, well, I guess what it is if the cottage cluster occurs, right, with no parking built in because a developer is trying to maximize the size of the unit, all it does is go back to what Brian was saying, which is the parking will need to occur on the surrounding neighborhoods, and we're just putting these cars out on the street, which then has this ripple-on effect of making the streets feel like parking lots. And certainly as a cyclist myself, you know, I tend to choose paths through the city that that aren't places where people can door me myself. So I think I agree with with a lot of what a lot of people have said about all of this. It would be great to have street pathways that don't have parking, so we can feel safe. But then we need to find a way of accommodating those cars somewhere. And maybe letting the market decide is the right way that we can do this, but I can't imagine developers building zero parking sort of developments, little cottage clusters